Welcome to the Maritime Executives podcast series, In the Know. I'm Tony Munoz, Editor-in-Chief. Our Executive Corner podcast will provide conversations with top executives concerning events and issues that are shaping our industry today. We will also bring you up to speed with the latest news and editorials covered by the Maritime Executive. So, ladies and gentlemen of the Maritime Executive, we welcome you to another session of In the Know. Today, we're very pleased to have Aaron Smith. He's the president and CEO of OMSA. For you who don't know what OMSA is, I'll let Aaron explain it to us. Aaron, I am a big follower of what you folks do in the Gulf of Mexico and what you do for the United States and the Jones Act. I'm a Jones Act advocate, so you're talking to the right person. So tell me more about what you're doing and how is the offshore maritime services industry doing?
Hey, well, Tony, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to see you again and great to be on the podcast. Long time listener. I guess first time caller here, but it's great to be on. And thank you so much. So yeah, OMSA, Offshore Marine Service Association. We have been around for 53 years now, officially.
Mhm.
Unofficially, goes back longer than that, but we are the trade association for the segment of the U.S. maritime industry that's engaged in offshore energy production. So we try to, one, primarily protect the Jones Act and make sure that the Jones Act covers the entire waterfront of the offshore energy industry, as Congress intended. Two, try to make sure that laws and regulations work for the hardworking men and women that are in this industry. And three, we are in a relationship-based business. So we really prioritize building community and building relationships and making sure that people understand they're in a collective industry and that we all work together and that we all have a place to be together. So those are the three primary functions of OMSA. I spend a lot of my time in those first two buckets with Jones Act protection and regulatory relief. And then leave the networking stuff to our very talented staff. So that's what we do, but it's great to be on.
Yeah, thanks. And so, one of the main agendas for OMSA is to keep the foreign operators out of the Gulf and into production areas. It's very lucrative. I know that there have been occasions where they had to bring in specialized equipment, and that has gotten a waiver, but very few waivers offered to the industry. So tell me about how that agenda, basically, when you see, have there been infractions that you've had to deal with? Tell me about some of those instances of when a foreign operator is just bound and determined he's going to show up and do business in the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, certainly. And yes, it's OMSA's contention that not enough is being done by the federal government to protect our workforce from unfair competition. And it is unfair. When anyone in a maritime industry anywhere around the world will tell you the primary cost driver of operating a vessel is crew cost.
Right.
And, some estimates, I don't think I've ever seen an estimate lower than 45%. Most are in the 60 to 70% of OPEX range is crew cost. And in the United States, in United States waters, we, U.S. vessel owners, legally required to hire U.S. mariners. And that's something we want to do. We appreciate doing that. That works for us. It gives us a stable workforce, gives us an educated workforce. But right next to us will be a vessel, a foreign vessel that is foreign owned, foreign built, and it will be and can legally operate in U.S. waters as foreign crewed. So you're talking about they are playing on a completely different playing field. It's not anywhere level. It's a different pay scale.
Right.
And that is we have a legal disadvantage there. So for that, we need the Jones Act, which says if you are moving merchandise between 2 points in the United States, you need to be U.S. built, U.S. crewed, U.S. owned. That's what it says. It says
Yeah,
Americans should be the
pretty basic
primary
stuff,
applicant in
right?
that. Yes, exactly. But that's not what we see. Through some ways that Customs and Border Protection has decided to have unelected bureaucrats interpret the Jones Act, it allows for foreign vessels to move merchandise within U.S. waters because they've redefined the word merchandise or they've redefined the word transportation. This it's kind of we're going back to the old Bill Clinton days here. It depends what the definition of is.
Is.
So we recently, January 20th, someone in government asked for a review. We did a review. We found in the offshore wind industry, which we cover as well, that we found 23 foreign vessels working in U.S. waters. Of those 23 vessels, I think 8 were built in China. I mean, we are giving a market to people who don't have our best interest in heart. And Tony, you mentioned specialized vessels. We're not talking about specialized vessels here. We are talking of those 22 vessels, I think one, two, three, four, five, six, 8 were tugs. 4 were barges.
Hmm.
What they're doing is they want to bring in the lowest cost vessels they can. And if that's a tug, if that's a barge, what are you saying? The U.S. flag doesn't have tugs and barges anymore, let alone the more, cable lay vessels or rock dumping vessels, those vessels, which we definitely also have in the fleet,
Yeah,
not
I
being
thought
used
for sure
anymore.
they had brought in foreign vessels for the offshore
Yep.
wind because there wasn't appropriate U.S. flag tonnage. But
I,
what you're
I
saying
disagree
is
with
that's
that.
not true. What you're saying is they brought in
No,
tugs and
no.
barges.
They will bring in, we will have, there was one instance that I had recently that I had 5 member vessels bid for a job and it went to a foreign flag vessel. We're not talking about specialized equipment here. We are talking about if there is a way that the developers can save a buck, that they will do so by using foreign equipment and foreign mariners
Of
over
course they
U.S.
will.
mariners. And
Of course they will.
yes, so that's what we see. And look, I'm not picking on the wind industry. I'm definitely a supporter of the wind industry. We have many OMSA members engaged in that industry.
Right.
We are supporters. I've been talking up offshore wind since 2012. So, we're not talking about that. What I'm talking about, we find the same thing in oil and gas. But that was just someone had asked for that study, so I use that as an example.
Right. Right. Well, when you look at the offshore industry right now, there isn't much happening in offshore wind. As a matter of fact, they've kind of really pulled back on that. And during this administration, it could change in the future. But um, certainly the Atlantic coast was primed for that sort of innovation and for energy. And I know that we did a case study on a company. I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of it right now, but they were building and they were staging everything, getting the tugboats involved. We had Atlantic Marine who was delivering a lot of their information, a lot of their product out to the sites, offshore sites, and it was very optimistic. Suddenly, it's not optimistic anymore. They're not going to be building anymore. They're not going to be staging at any place out there. So that industry has sort of disappeared during this administration. I think that what you're talking about now is something that you're going to have to deal with a lot in the future. So you're obviously getting your ducks in a row. So tell us about the White House Maritime Action Plan. What is going on with that?
Well, certainly. So, was released, let's see, February 13th, I believe. Yeah,
Okay.
it was Friday the 13th. Maritime Action Plan is a very good product of 41 pages of some really good information about the U.S. maritime industry and what's going on and what needs to be done. So the Maritime Action Plan, or MAP, as it's called, seeks to increase U.S. shipbuilding capacity by bolstering investments in U.S. shipyards, reforming government programs and shipbuilding programs, and the way the government orders ships to make these programs more effective, less costly, and work faster. For vessel owners, I think possibly the biggest component, there's some operating subsidies that are mentioned in there, but not really defined. I think that could be a very exciting opportunity. When we compete on an international scale, you're competing against every other nation is subsidizing their maritime industry.
Sure.
So I think that could be very exciting. But in near term and in spelled out details within the map, I think the biggest component for vessel owners and operators is the regulatory relief angle that it talks about. Far too often, our regulators, specifically the U.S. Coast Guard, stands atop of and thwarts the growth of the U.S. maritime industry by saddling our industry with regulations that no other flag state imposes upon their industry and that the Coast Guard does not impose on vessels that work in our waters. Recently, Coast Guard finalized cybersecurity regulations. Obviously, an important topic. Just read a report recently, and it was in our weekly newsletter that maritime cybersecurity attacks have increased 100% in just the last year. But the Coast Guard regulations only apply the cybersecurity protections on U.S. flag vessels, not the foreign flag vessels working in our waters all the time. And as we saw with the Dolly in Baltimore, a foreign flag vessel can cause problems to U.S. infrastructure.
Sure.
Instead, the Coast Guard said, well, IMO voluntary guidance covers those foreign flag vessels' cybersecurity needs. Wait, so IMO guidance is the same as a Coast Guard regulation? No, 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 no. Those two do not equate. So too often we have that sort of impact where we have the Coast Guard pushing regulations that make it almost impossible to grow the U.S. maritime industry. So I was really pleased to see that the White House put out a plan that talked about how we can get rid of those barriers. And in fact, mentioned one of the barriers that that we were able to eliminate last year on portable accommodation modules. The international standard has a very easy, safe way to ensure that every portable accommodation module that's put on a vessel is safe and is a asset to that vessel and make sure that it's not hindering any of the mariners on board. Coast Guard acknowledged that system works very well and then created its own system requiring two different inspections and plan designs by Coast Guard officials. Takes months.
Yeah.
But that's only applicable to U.S. vessels. So we were able to eliminate that. And the map mentioned that as a great example of how working with industry, this White House has been able to eliminate some of those regulatory burdens to grow the industry. So I really applaud the White House for doing this plan.
So we have some very wealthy operators in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, they have a lot of influence, a lot of power, and yeah, my third edition back in 1997 was Bill O'Malley from Tidewater.
Yeah.
And that was how I learned about the offshore industry. Prior to that, I had been a steamship line guy, been a tugboat guy, barging guy, but I never really knew the breadth and the wealth, the activity that takes place in the Gulf of Mexico. So having that he could show up and spending time with Bill O'Malley and Larry Rigdon and learning about the industry way back when 25 years ago was amazing. And I've watched it grow and I've watched it develop and I've watched, but it's maintained its presence and its control of the Gulf of Mexico. OMSA has, and the Jones Act operators have, and they're flourishing in those marketplaces, building great tug units, offshore
Yep.
vessels that are just off the charts, amazing. Costing millions and millions of dollars of investment. And you're right. I remember that. For $20 more, the crew would jump to another vessel. So,
Oh,
because there
not
was some
even 20.
stability in working, So if I got an extra $20 a week, I'm going over to that guy because it's the same job. Those sort of things that were always an issue. Are they still an issue today?
You know, well, we have, I think the Jones Act, where the Jones Act is enforced, what you see amazing growth in the industry. And, often you hear that the Jones Act thwarts competition. That's not true because what we see in the areas where the Jones Act is enforced, like on typical supply work for OSVs, what you have seen is a proliferation of operators to where, let's take container lines. Well, I don't know what percentage, way north of 50%, way north of 70%
Right.
of the container traffic in the entire world is controlled by three Chinese companies.
Right.
But then you look at that's not competition. But then look at the U.S. offshore supply sector. OMSA represents, and I hate to say it, unfortunately, we don't represent all of the operators, but OMSA represents more than 65 vessel operators in the Gulf Coast and on the West Coast and East Coast who operate offshore supply vessels.
Hmm.
In fact, the average OMSA member fleet is 6 vessels. And so you have all of that, where you have all of those people sailing out of the same handful of ports for the same, let's call it maybe dozens of different charters, and they are competing every day very fiercely against each other on price.
Right.
So, I think when you look at those situations where when the Jones Act is put in place and is enforced as Congress intended, it breeds competition and that lowers the cost, sometimes unfortunately for my member companies, but
Right.
that does lower the cost and keep the cost low of US offshore energy production, which is what we all want.
Yeah.
So,
Competition.
I think that yes, those do work. And to your point, Tony, and I'd love to get into this too, is these are amazingly technologically complex vessels that are not only assets to our offshore energy infrastructure, but are also assets to our national security and our homeland security.
Yeah, there's no question. When I posed the question, how would Grandma like to be sitting on her porch in Iowa and see a Japanese flag vessel come up the Mississippi River? She'd freak out, right?
Yeah.
And that's not what we're looking for. And
Hmm.
they simply want into the marketplace because it's a very vibrant, robust
Stable.
marketplace. It's very stable, stable in employment. It's stable in the shipyards that I've dealt with over the years. We're still being very productive and things of that nature.
Yep.
One of the kickbacks that I've gotten about the Maritime Action Plan is that it requires investment by the operators, and the government isn't really going to help at all. So now you're in that catch 22. I'm going to do everything the way I've always done it before, but based on what my bank statements and my P&L says, what I can afford, and what I'm going to build, and what is the long-term projection of that. It's all on me. Government isn't going to supply me anything. So, it's just pie in the sky. And that's kind of what I've gotten the feedback on the Maritime Action Plan presented by this administration.
I think that the plan is to bolster U.S. shipbuilding capacity. So
Right.
the plan sought to increase shipyards. And that is good. And I think that should be lauded. And, I think that for the first time in really multiple generations, we have numerous different government actors talking about how to increase the maritime industry. And I think that that should be lauded and that should be celebrated across. Now, I think that, there is, when you look at increasing shipbuilding, and the other big portion of MAP is increasing mariners. Well, kind of to your point, Tony, a mariner needs someone to sign the front of their paycheck. A shipyard needs someone to put a vessel order in.
Right.
And in both of those cases, that individual standing in the middle there are U.S. vessel owners. And I would like to see that component realized more, and that the best way to grow the mariner workforce and the best way to grow the shipyards is to have incentives for U.S. vessel operators and to remove some of
Right.
those disincentives to use a foreign vessel. Holding, like I said, remove the regulatory burdens for U.S. vessel operators. That's great. But let's also give them a market. Let's get all the Chinese vessels out of the U.S. offshore energy industry.
Right.
All here in the Gulf or up on the East Coast, get all Chinese built vessels out of our waters. Now you're creating an incentive for U.S. vessel owners to put orders into shipyards that will
Absolutely.
grow those shipyards. And
Absolutely.
then those shipyards will not just build for the commercial industry, they're going to build for the defense industry as well. So I
So
think that
let me
that
ask you,
component,
what Chinese vessels are in the offshore? Do they have a lot of them?
uh,
I mean,
so
are
there's
there a lot of not working offshore oil, but work offshore wind?
both.
Both,
Both.
really?
You see Chinese built vessels here in the Gulf of Mexico, and you see Chinese built vessels on the East Coast doing offshore wind. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. But they're not,
Yeah.
are
And
they operating in the energy markets?
yes, yes.
They are as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that needs to be looked at is,
Yeah, absolutely.
so many times there's a big component of the map that
Yeah.
talks about working with allied nations. Hey, that's great. Love that. Yes, let's do that. But let's
Right.
also make sure that those allied nations aren't turning that companies from those allied nations aren't turning around and putting orders into Chinese shipyards,
Yeah, right.
because that doesn't
Sure.
help our industry.
Yeah, that's
So
not cool. That's not cool. No, I,
yeah.
you say that the U.S. Coast Guard is a regulatory entity that takes care of that. Sounds like they're not taking care of that, and that they're allowing all kinds of waivers to bring in these certain vessels when we have the capacity to build and operate those vessels with U.S. flags and investment. So where do we go from here is the question.
Well, what we are doing here at OMSA is we are working on multiple fronts. One, we are making sure that it's actually kind of weird. It's customs that is the arbiter of what is and is not a Jones Act violation, which is kind of, you think about a customs is by nature trade. The Jones Act, by definition, is domestic. It's a
Right,
cabotage law
right,
between capes.
right,
So first, we kind of have the wrong person looking at what is, because we
right.
have the trade experts looking at a domestic law. So not surprisingly, it's gotten wrong a lot. So we have challenged customs on a lot of their reinterpretations. Again, these are non-statutory determinations that just unelected bureaucrats within CBP have made about, oh, well, this merchandise isn't merchandise. This transportation isn't really transportation. Just some really things. So we are legally challenging that and are engaged in litigation there. We have also worked with our friends in Congress who are understanding that these what the harm that these rulings have created. And then, like I said, removing those cost barriers that are only put on U.S. vessels and not foreign vessels as well. And
Yeah,
we've had some success there
yeah,
where you're now seeing some of the legal requirements that are put into statute. Congress is now writing that these new requirements apply to U.S. vessels and foreign vessels operating in U.S. offshore energy markets. And that's very positive to see that they're starting to establish that level playing field I was talking about.
Yeah. So, what is the future of the offshore industry overall? What is your perspective? I mean, you've seen vessels come, operators go. You've seen changes in the way foreign operators are being allowed in. I mean, what does the future hold for OMSA and for the U.S. offshore?
I think the future is more vessels that are built that are not built for one specific purpose. Our vessels have always been built as Swiss Army knives that are able to be customized or
Right.
modified to do a bunch of different jobs. I think you're going to see that continue. And so that will mean that a vessel that, I don't look at vessels as an offshore wind vessel or as an oil and gas
Right.
vessel because the vessels that I see when I go to East Coast ports are the exact same vessel that I see when I go down to Fushan.
Yeah.
I've seen multiple instances. So I think you're going to see more of that. Whatever segment of the industry you're in, whether you're in oil and gas, offshore wind, government support, carbon capture
Hmm.
sequestration, any of these markets, you are increasingly talking about a subsea market. So, that means I think what you're going to see is vessels that have more subsea capabilities. You're going to see
Right.
increasing market with the ROV industry, the crane industry, cable laying, cable repair. These are the things that those are, again, they're not just offshore energy assets. They are national security and homeland security assets as well, because they can be working offshore oil and gas one day, offshore wind another, and then can be going and ensuring that our subsea cable networks are protected, repaired, and are not being
Right.
messed with by foreign actors, or can be fixed if messed with by foreign actors. So I think that that's what you're going to see is you're going to see vessels that are able to flow between different markets easy and are able to do a lot of subsea tasks. That's what I think the future is.
Yeah, so it sounds like we were well prepared, well invested to manage what we have in front of us today. Obviously, owners are looking at some of their vessels and replacements and some of the enhancements that they can do to. They're always looking for advantages. And it sounds like that OMSA is representing these owners and DC and legislatively and in terms of regulations. I would say to you that what I'm hearing is that the Coast Guard needs to be educated about what the onset is really about and what offshore vessels really do so they don't regulate you guys and allow foreign operators to come in. So I would imagine that's a big part of your agenda is constantly fighting with them about vessels being allowed to come in on waivers. So that seems like that problem number one. It sounds like that the owners are supporting your agenda. It sounds like the administration is wants to invest in it, but
These things take time. And
yeah,
again, you see with the Ships Act, with the map, you see a historic interest and understanding in the maritime industry.
right.
That really needs to be lauded and approved. And now, we have to ensure that to mix metaphors, we land the plane here. And so that is what is necessary. And it's also in working with our friends in the Coast Guard, I think that uh, it would sound, and it sounds asinine to say that the United States Air Force should regulate commercial air travel in the
Right.
United States.
Right.
But that's what we have. We
Yeah.
have an armed service that is regulating the commercial maritime industry.
Right.
I think we need to have someone charged with Coast Guard policy. These are policy matters. And policy in the DoD, in the rest of the federal government, in any other agency, policy is handled by government officials, not uniformed service members. And so
Right.
I have long supported, an effort that was first started by Senator Cantwell, and has been supported by Congressman Ezell down in Mississippi, which is to establish a Secretary of the Coast Guard. And so we would have a civilian policymaker
Yeah.
that can make these calls about what the policy of the United States is. And then the uniformed service members of the Coast Guard can go back to calling balls and strikes.
Right.
That's where their expertise is. And let's take that policy making and put it in the appropriate source. So that's something I think we can all work on to address that matter.
Well, Aaron, I thank you very much for your time and your insight.
Thank you.
And it's always a pleasure. I've been following the offshore industry for as long as I've been in the maritime industry, and certainly since the Maritime Executive started in 1996. It's always been a favorite part of the industry for me. And the Jones Act, I totally support. And I think that by keeping foreign vessel operators out of the United States, it's profitable it creates more jobs, it creates more opportunities, and that's what the maritime industry of the United States is needing. And we appreciate your leadership in it. And thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Tony. Great to get to talk to you anytime, especially on your podcast here. We got to get you to come on to Maritime in America, our podcast.
All
And
right.
if that sounds like a Ronald Reagan Morning in America phrase, that's exactly what it's supposed to sound like. Because I do
Well, I'd
think
love to get on it and
that,
talk about the things that we know in the media. And
well, I'd love to have you on and to hear your expertise and to hear your insights and hear your stories. I mean, that's what this industry is. It's a bunch of great stories.
great.
So come on, let's hear them. All
All
right.
right.
Well,
Well,
thank you so much,
thank you
Tony.
for your time.
Again,
I appreciate
appreciate
it.
it.
Bye.